Hello, hello, hello. I pray that this message reaches everyone well. So I thank God for each of you. I know that I was going to be on a lot earlier, but due to some delays in traffic getting back home to share with you all, I am getting on here a few minutes behind, but nevertheless, I am here now online and definitely want to be a blessing to you all as God has indeed been a blessing to me. And so I pray that, again, everyone's day is going well. I pray that your head and your hearts are right. And I just give God the glory in advance as I share with you all on today. And this message, again, will be brief, but to the point for you. And I'd like to share with you, as you've likely seen in the topic already, just from the idea of the servant. About 17 plus years ago, I found myself in a situation whereby there was an elderly gentleman who was a good friend of mine and his wife, and I found myself in a situation whereby I was serving them in a capacity that I did not initially anticipate. Yet and still I found myself in a situation whereby I had an opportunity to be a blessing to some seniors who were in need of a blessing at that time. And it was one of those things that the role of what I was doing as a servant continued to change as time passed and circumstance and situation for that elderly couple changed. And what I found is that I ended up in a role overseeing a lot of things for them, including medical care, etc. And over the next decade plus, I would eventually end up overseeing their funerals as well. The point I'm making is that as a servant, we have great challenges, but we have great opportunities. The gentleman, the senior gentleman, was the one that outlived his wife, and it was over time that through my opportunity to serve, he not only renewed a relationship that he had with Christ, but he solidified that relationship and he became one. Hello, Tracy. He became one that was more in tune with who he was as a person. Now, keep in mind, we can often look at the roles that God have us in serving, and we can begin to question God as to why I'm doing certain things, and Lord, why are you doing certain things? Yet and still, if we're obedient to the Master, if we're obedient to the Father, we'll find that the servant's role is one that is extremely important and one that God simply calls on us to do. Keep in mind, by definition, a servant is a devoted and helpful follower or supporter, and that's who we're called to be. Often people want the role that God has not designated for them at that time or that season in their lives. And one of the greatest roles we'll find is the role of servant. We say we want to be Christ-like, yet and still we don't want the role of servant. And that's what society has pretty much taught us as a whole, that you want to do certain things, but servant is not on that list. People look at servant's role as a role that they do not desire. However, we find that through Christ in his own words, he was a servant of the Most High, of his Father God. Keep in mind, a servant is one who performs duties for others. And so when we begin to change our mindset about how a servant is viewed, then we can begin to walk and work in the power of being a servant. A servant is one who is simply distinguished as an obedient and faithful follower of God or Christ. Think about that for a moment. So if you look at yourself as someone who is obedient and distinguished for your service and obedience to Christ or God, then indeed you are a servant. They're always submissive to the will of the Father. Now, with that being said, this begins to look a little more attractive to some. When you know that you're one that's submissive to the will of the Father, and to be submissive, that's why I want to point out the servant's role is so important, because every single